Are some of these buildings that you're talking about doing better than net zero, like really being climate positive or taking, producing more energy than they use, clean energy than they use, or having.
For large commercial building, that is generally hard. I think the whole concept of net zero is interesting. I mean, ultimately, we mean on-site net zero, right? And I think when you are in a residential home and it's a single family home, then this is a nice kind of closed off system where that is pretty feasible. Once you start getting in apartment buildings, it becomes very, very, very difficult to do. And then it becomes dogma a bit. Or, I mean, a lab building in Kendall, that is impossible. And that's kind of this ongoing debate when a city says, oh, every building has to be net zero. I don't think on-site net zero, that doesn't even make any sense, because there's frankly nothing wrong with having a PV system on the local dump and just have a line going to wherever the building is. And you rather want high density so that people walk there and all the other benefits we know from people coming together. So I think net zero, we have to watch out that cities don't get into this, okay, everything has to be net zero because it's catchy and it's good, because it's if you do that at the city level, you end up with more sprawl than you might realize. Right?
That's true for you because you really understand things, but I think sometimes it helps to have some soundbite that people can actually understand. And if you don't set a really lofty goal that every regular citizen can at least get the concept of, you might say it's too difficult, or you might say it's not really possible. But if you're having, the complexity of it, I don't know what a better PR campaign would be for. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the city just have, I mean, you're of course right. I mean, messaging is always hard. The nice thing about net zero is when people ask me what that goes, well, you go twice a year into the basement and you look at your net meter reading, and if it's lower than before, or the same, then you're done. That's very easy to grasp for anybody, right? Yeah. To do that. And that's, of course, an attraction. Even though in Massachusetts you never have that because you have two counters, so you still have to take that. It's still too complicated. But in principle, this is how it goes. I think for, again, small residential, I think it's a good idea. It's just impossible. And I mean, I don't know if I want any of the lab buildings in Kendall to be stopped being constructed, or, I mean, they do good for the society and world on other levels.
Yeah, and we have a high voltage power grid, and there's economies of scale of building renewable energy at kind of utility scale, right?
Yeah.
And so I mean that definitely has a role. I worry though about kind of people building buildings, and then it's like, oh yeah, we're just going to buy zero emission electricity, and that solves our problem. So this is
that's always the easy way out. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I mean, the issue with all these green building rating systems, such as LEED, there was this eternal. I think they come from a right place, and then they try to. In the end of the day, designers try to pick, or design teams try to pick the points that they can easily get to get their LEED Gold system, and you don't have any guarantee of performance. And there you are totally right, Jeannie, in terms of if it's net zero, it's a great building in a way, right? You can get into this extreme cases where I was once on an architectural review price commission, and there was this gorgeous building somewhere in the desert in California, like a big building, and it was net zero and water net zero because it collected so much water. But it's in the desert, huge building, single story, covered with PV, and that's great, but it's also not necessary. I think it's great that the owner did whatever they built there. It's fantastic, but I wouldn't say that this is the building of the future, right? It's an absurd use of material, and people probably driving 3 cars there. And
So do you want to tell us about container farms?
Oh yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. Yeah, I mean that is an interesting topic, and you would wonder why building technologies got into container farms to begin with. And what happens, I teach every 2 years in the spring this urban modeling class where we have a growing suite of tools called the urban modeling interface that people who use simulation tools such as Rhinoceros 3D. It's a plugin for that. And that allows you to model hundreds of thousands of buildings at the same time. And we started off with kind of our traditional approach where here's the building, how much operational energy does it use at the urban level, how much access to light do you have, embodied energy. Then we started getting more into issues such as walkability. And then one year there was a student who said, oh, I want to model a greenhouse. So I said, oh yeah, let's model a greenhouse. I mean, it's a building without people in it. Nobody complains, and you can totally you can predict how it's going to be operated.
And it's all windows.
And it's all window. And then the interesting thought, yeah, but I want to model an enclosed farm. And she showed me this picture of this closed container with just, LEDs hanging from there. And I said, do you think that's a good idea? And she asked me what I thought. I think that's a terrible idea to kind of go with LED lights in the basement. I want to eat plants that want sunlight. I don't know. I mean, it seemed like very foreign to me. But her name is Hadija Benes. She's was a student from MIT Portugal, actually, and is now an expert in this. Urban agriculture. And she persisted and then started doing this analysis. And the numbers were really interesting, that you can really grow in these shipping containers an enormous amount of food, like breathtakingly. And then when you start folding in these different layers, such as how far does food travel in places such as Boston in the winter here, this whole concept started making a lot more sense. And there's an interesting company called Freight Farms in Boston that they are among several competing companies that are selling these systems. So we contacted them, they gave us a tour, and at one point we bolted a weather station on one of their active containers here, and we basically measured all water going in, all energy going in, and all food going out. And so kind of validated our physics-based model. And the model was good to begin with, but it was just nice to see that it actually works. And now I see a lot of benefits in that. You have to be in a part of the world where your electric grid is pretty clean. That is obviously helpful when you lose the LED. It should be a part of the world, not Amsterdam or Lisbon necessarily, but some parts where it's like Singapore or here where it's very cold, where food travels large distances, because then you reap over part of the years these enormous benefits. And then this all makes sense. And then I see supermarkets really liking it. There's this company called Gotham Green, for example, in New York. They have not shipping container, but greenhouses on top of a Whole Foods. It's just when you have this very short production waste, then basically your local supermarkets, your Star Market becomes your farm app, right? You can basically just say, oh, I'm going to buy my hydroponic lettuce every day. Every week I buy, 10 or so, but I want a fixed price. And in a way, that is part of the appeal, that you can produce at fixed cost, no risk of not getting the food with these container farms, whatever you want. You program it and 6 weeks from today I have the lettuce. So it's an interesting system. And part of the appeal is also for cities that all the money that they spend on cities else, that they keep it in the city, and they need people working there. So I think this is probably going to be one of the biggest draws, that you get green tech jobs that are actually stay within the city.
And so it's you don't need sunlight, you can stack them up or...
Yeah, it's interesting. When we first did that, we were all fantasizing about, we're gonna stack them, and we look in a hot climate if there are benefits of putting shading systems on top of them. And what really, that is not a big surprise, but only for me it was, I guess, that when you buy shipping containers, these are basically fridges that people have on the open ocean for weeks at a time. These things are incredibly well insulated. And they use fit-out shipping containers and just repurpose them. So it actually really doesn't matter so much. You can pretty much put them in the sun. I'm sure there are marginal advantages of putting them in the shade, but it's not as big as we think. So you have a lot of flexibility there. I think what is nice about it, you can play with them. You can just create your plazas, maybe make 10 shipping containers together and then another shipping container restaurant on top, and you just create these kind of wild, vibrant urban spaces. And when you Google this, I mean, a lot of architects, young architects especially, have discovered shipping container because it's a really cheap way of building something, and when you're starting out, it's a great way of getting your design ideas out in the world. Right? So
I think I read an example from London that they were using the abandoned tube tunnels, the underground tunnels that were being.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there they don't need the shipping containers. They just find abandoned urban infrastructure and spaces and do that as well. And yeah, it's beautiful. And again, it seems really counterintuitive at the beginning that you would put electricity down there, right? Mm-hmm. But I guess the big thing is, have you tried the hydroponic salad? Yeah,
it's great.
It's excellent, right? It's excellent. I think my wife was, is that a good idea? What are you doing? And then one day I just bought them, but I didn't tell her what I bought, and she loved the salad. And I think in parts of the world there's a certain cultural kind of
we want our food to come from the dirt.
Insecurity, yeah. I mean, food has to grow in ground. Food that never touched the soil is questionable. But I mean, you see there are other parts of the world where this is heavily embraced. So in Singapore, you find a lot of rooftops now covered with it because a lot of food has to be imported from abroad, and the quality is good. I mean, that's ultimately, I think, what matters.
Also, I'd imagine the efficiency of LED lighting has been key to this, right? You couldn't do this with the old, crappy lighting technology.
No, I mean, it's all LED. And what I found really interesting, if you just look at Freight Form's gonna love it. If you look at their first and their second generation, their second generation of container is significantly better. I mean, they grow more. I think it's more or less, I don't want to say something wrong, but I think they're about double the food output per container. And I think they halved the hours you have to work, somebody has to manually work in there. I mean, there goes my argument for high-paying green jobs, because I just halved the number. I think they're just at the beginning. They told me once that the original generation of LEDs they bought off the shelf, and the second one they have custom made in China. And yeah, I think we are just at the beginning of optimizing these systems, right?
Yeah. I'm thinking of communities that have a lot of shipping containers and a lot of LEDs, and it's basically Burning Man. How he has the highest concentration of shipping containers and LEDs in the world.
Everything is Burning Man for you.
Sorry.
No, I think it's great. These just this thinking outside of the box. There's one fun study that Kristen Cedar did in our lab, where we looked at how is the uptake of these container farms, how might this work over time? And we looked at a mixed-use neighborhood in Chicago. And right now, when you build one of these neighborhoods with, at the lower bottom, you have retail, and then offices, and then residential. There are pretty stringent requirements just about anywhere in the US how much parking you have to put. So when you look at this building in section, you basically see all these parking places in the bottom, right? And they just have to put them in right now. And so we did this 30-year out analysis where we said as the grid gets cleaner, more and more produce becomes profitable. Right now it's mainly green lettuce and herbs. That are the high profit margin greens, right? But we basically saw every couple of years you flip more and more food. And so basically as there's less and less parking needs because people have electric self-driving cars, we started to kind of fill up the whole parking structure with containers, and then you feed the neighborhood instead of park your car there, which is kind of a fun synergy, right?
But in the case of these shipping containers for hydroponic agriculture, you're literally thinking inside the box.
I love it. I'm sure you should ask these guys to talk on your show there. I think you'll love them.
We'll get them on the show.
Yeah, no, I think it's good to, it's just one way of kind of imagining how living in the future is going to be, right? And I think we'll have a lot of spaces that are unused that we are not even fully realizing right now. I mean, I think a lot of companies are obviously realizing that they have way more square footage than what they need. And I mean, these are all opportunities to either get more cities in there, this loose architecture that we can repurpose again and again. Right?
Yeah, so like when we go hybrid and people are working from home, we can fill in their workspaces with hydroponic lettuce.
Yeah, that's exactly. They can go to the farm.
Well, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah.
It was really interesting.
Excellent. That was great.
Anything else you want to tell people about? We have an audience of a lot of nerds out there who are.
If you're a nerd, be interested in the built environment. It has such an enormous impact on our carbon emissions globally, and I think the field itself is turning and becoming more and more attractive because of digitalization of the construction sector. But we are not fully there. So if you're a nerd and you just want to help us basically build and maintain and construct buildings more effectively, then the world is your oyster, right? And
there's going to be a lot of work and a lot of design challenges.
A lot of buildings are being built, and we need innovative ideas because the majority of buildings are not designed by architects anymore. So at least the buildings that are designed, or we should automate the processes, whatever works to make the environment as effective as possible.
That's great.
We're going to be living in shipping containers.
That's
Our lettuce.
The Burning Man.
Well, thanks again for being on the show.
It's really
That was fun. Good to see you.
good to see you.
Bye-bye.